Now, the term Advaita, it refers to its idea that the true self, Atman, is the same as the highest metaphysical reality, Brahman. And there were followers of that school of thought. So, Advaita is the recognition and the so-called experiences of those Advaitans that wandered the wilderness, as reported in the very, very first Upanishads. So the Upanishads are written accounts of the Advaitans that went out into the wilderness to conduct what they referred to as self-inquiry, self-realization. So they were referred to as Advaitans or Advaita Vedantins, and that was shortened. So Advaita Vedantins was shortened to Advaitans. And there was the idea that sprung up regarding the teachings and the seeking of spiritual liberation. And back then, in the first millennium BCE, that's an acronym for before the Common Era. And before the Common Era is equivalent to before Christ. Okay, so when we say before Christ, prior to the story of those other self-conjured conjured selves that interpreted a great teacher that was referred to also as the teacher of righteousness, the master of justice, and the interpretations of that figurehead or that persona, what was manifesting, bringing truth, not only bringing truth, there was a claim that this was the truth of all truths, which apparently appears to align with all information and knowledge that was imparted from consciousness, and then from the imparting of knowledge from consciousness, then the languages sprung about based on the different frequencies of resonance. Now, what's interesting about the law of resonance is that for those that have a primary understanding and express via the use of the English language, these manifestations of human corporeal units of local quality consciousness energy forms as conjured selves that agree upon various schools of thought. Now, the mental thought system can conjure so much content of knowledge that's cognized. How is the knowledge cognized? There's consciousness. But all there is not consciousness. All there is simply this. But it cannot be named. Why can it not be named as everything else is apparently being named or provided an entitlement? The reason why that is because there is no reason. Now, that may sound like an excuse to that which is seeking, because that which is seeking wants concrete answers. They want answers, they want resonance. That's the conjured self's life. Seeking answers to questions. None of that is necessary simply because all that is simply this: empty fullness, infinitudinal complexification, spacious aliveness, does not require a knowledge base. It is simply beingness. And it's even beyond beingness, because beingness suggests there is something being. Something that is being that can be manifesting in more than one way. If something can be manifesting in more than one way, then we would be referring to one way and then another way. And then that would not be supporting non-separation. Non-separation doesn't require to be supported by something else. It is already whole, perfect, complete, just as it is. So, there are these phrases in the English language that are commonly spoken of, referred to, using those terms, those phrases: empty fullness, infinitudinal complexification, all that is and all that is not, we are and we are not, it is and it isn't, it is not this, it is not that, Neti-Neti. Those phrases are as close an explanation using the English language that can be uttered or can be expressed. And if there are other conjured English words and phrases to be used, it cannot establish an explanation to explain how this is and isn't, all at the same time, simultaneously. Science provides theories, of course. There's theoretical physics. That's as close as they are attempting to explain how this is and isn't at the same time. There is, of course, the double slit experiment. That is about as close as science will most likely ever get. Now, when I say most likely, because that which is unknowable can become knowable. How can the unknowable become knowable? That would simply be based on how empty fullness appears. Empty fullness can appear as absolutely anything. And within the appearance of absolutely anything, there are things. Now, they appear as separate things, which is how and why labeling, categorizing, and naming came about, simply because it apparently appears that an appearance of something can last for an indeterminate duration in space and time. And yet that appearance that is appearing in space and time is indeterminate of its duration of appearances, simply because all that appears is a frequency of resonance and energetic movement. Empty fullness is energy. Pure energy, the purest energy that could ever be, or could ever be witnessed or observed as absolutely everything. And yet it is unknowable how that is so and not so. It is and it isn't. It's both. That's the paradox that cannot be answered. It's the questionless question. It's the answerless answer. It cannot be answered. It cannot be questioned. Neither questioned nor answered. It is both. It is its own answer to its own question. Stating and hearing the paradoxical phrases this way causes, or apparently appears to cause, the mind of a self-conjured self to not only reject such utterances or expressions using the English language, but also to ignore and to not understand and to label that as unsolvable. It's a hard problem. It's the problem that the metaphysician says that they cannot figure out. They do not know. Well, they simply cannot figure out, and they will never know, simply because that is unknowable. Can that which is unknowable suddenly become knowable? Well, that would definitely depend on what? That would depend on absolutely everything. That would depend on that which is manifesting as absolutely everything. So what is absolutely everything is both knowable and unknowable. So that which becomes knowable, as though there's a becoming of knowing happening, it apparently appears to be that which was once relegated as unknowable is now suddenly becoming knowable? No. It has always been both, and it will always remain both, knowable and unknowable. Well, how can something be both? That is a question that can never be answered. Which is why it is a paradox. A paradox can neither be answered or cannot be provided with questions. A paradox cannot be questioned, just as an answer cannot be provided of any question that's paradoxical. Therefore, it could be said that absolutely everything is paradoxically so and not so. Attempts to go any further than that, there is no further than that. Just as all that is simply this is empty fullness, there is no going further than that, because there's nowhere else to go. The paradoxical situation about going, nothing is going anywhere in the first place, because there are no second places or third places. Every awareness is a description of absolutely everywhere, at all times, in all spaces and all times, throughout the infinite universe. Therefore, there are no fixed positions as here and there. This is why it is all cancelled out. This is why it has been expressed that non-duality Advaita Vedanta is about regarding negation. Negation of the idea of separation. Non-duality Advaita Vedanta is simply non-separation. And that's it. That is it right there, simplified to a few sentences that summarizes empty fullness. It's not knowable how it is both real and unreal, observable and unobservable, knowable and unknowable, all at the same time. That is simply unknowable. And yet, it still can be expressed in specific certain situations, and situations are not separate of their own situations. These situations are jostling about and can manifest in one of innumerable ways. Therefore, absolutely everything that's simply this, that's whole, complete, and perfect, just as it is, contains absolutely every single innumerable combination of realness and unrealness, of observable manifestation and unobservable manifestation, of knowable information or knowable knowledge and unknowable information, unknowable knowledge, inaccessible. There is that which is accessible and there is that which is inaccessible. And yet, in its entirety as empty fullness, is both accessible and inaccessible. Just as there is the blend, a natural blend, whereby light and darkness are seamless. They appear as though darkness can appear and light can appear simultaneously. It is as though light appears, and is there darkness, as is darkness dissipated where light appears? No, they are both mixed together. The resonance of it, the intensity of the emanation of light can be either slightly dim or slightly brighter. The emanation of brightness is based on emanations of resonance. Each resonance has a particular energetic movement of resonance. And that cannot be understood whilst referring to these emanations that are not separate. They appear as though they are separate, but they're seamless. They're so well mixed together that one cannot say, or the statement cannot be stated as an absolute truth that there is light, but without light there cannot be darkness, and without darkness there cannot be light. They are both light and darkness simultaneously. So there's another paradox. There are paradoxes throughout the infinite universe, and another expression that is closest to that is the Alpha and Omega. And that happens to be the first and last letter of the Greek alphabet. And this was an interpretation of how Christianity had developed in a similar way that Advaita of the Upanishads had developed. There had apparently appeared to be groups of self-conjured selves that gathered together after wandering the wildernesses of these human corporeal manifestations, decided to wander outside the village or the community, the societal structure of the time, if you will. And this was, of course, in the heart of India and the surrounding areas, where human corporeal manifestations were simply appearing, but did not yet have any particular type of structured language to communicate. And simply because the need to communicate was not so sophisticated. The sophistication of communication developed in a similar way as the energetic movement of the idea of a self-conjured self. The idea of an I, of a separate I, a separate me, a separate you, and then the idea of separation was entertained. Did it happen purposely? No. It just apparently appeared to happen that way. Energies, excuse me, energies combining in various ways that are infinitudinally complexified. Just as the flow of water when it is witnessed regarding an example of that would be a fountain. The unpredictability of the movement of water. A fountain that bubbles up. The amount of water, the volume of water, and the direction that that volume of water is revealing or manifesting will show the flow not the same every single time that it manifests. When we say every single time that something manifests, it apparently appears as though something is appearing, as time is time in the appearance of that. So absolutely everything that is appearing is likened to an overlay. It is an overlay of an energetic movement. Time in the appearance. That is one of innumerable explanations of how it apparently appears to be that everything is appearing as it does of its own accord and volition. So that accord and volition can never be predicted because of the sheer innumerable multitudinal or infinitudinally multitudinally complexified manifestations of how manifestations are appearing in one of innumerable ways. They cannot be predicted how they are going to appear. And that is empty fullness appearing of its own accord and volition, which is how and why there are no separate entities or energetic movements that are manifesting of their own free will and choice to manifest. There is no separate free will and choice of a living thing or an energetic movement that apparently appears to be alive. That is so simply because it is mingling. That living entity or that living thing that apparently appears to be a separate living entity or thing is mingling so well that it cannot be explained. It cannot be understood. It cannot be cognized. That is unknowable. How something can manifest in space and time and at the same time not be of space and time, for it is both. It is and it isn't. It is from out of nowhere, from nothing, from a void, then manifesting in space and time. So in a sense, time is one of the streams. Consciousness is another one similar to it. Without consciousness, it cannot be cognized, cannot be communicated, cannot be expressed via a unit of local quality of consciousness energy form. When that too is mingling with absolutely everything that's appearing, as time is time in the apparent appearance of absolutely everything to appear as it does, of its own accord and volition, not of time's accord and volition, but of its own accord and volition, of empty fullness. It is whole, complete, perfect, but it cannot be predicted how it will, of its own accord and volition, appear, as time is time in the appearance of absolutely everything. That cannot be predicted. That which can be predicted in the sciences would be small movements of energetic movements in nature, as of course they have been explained already, and yet in so many different languages. Here is how reason, meaning, and purpose does not matter and never did matter, for absolutely everything to appear as it always does, always apparently appears, whole, complete, and perfect just as it appears, as it does. And that's the paradox. Absolutely everything is and it isn't, both at the same time. But nobody can ever claim to know that. And yet there continue attempts. Continuous attempts via what are claimed to be claims from self-conjured contra cells. And then groups of self-conjured cells in agreement with some type of explanation for everything that appears as it does. One of those explanations is via consciousness, the study of consciousness. Now, these so-called experts of consciousness to conjure up something that way. I mean, the conjuring from a self-conjured conjured self has no, it seems to have no limitations, or it has no, they are as innumerable as everything else, it apparently appears to be, regarding explanations of what is manifesting as it appears as it does, that does not require labeling, does not require naming, does not require categorizing, and yet that's the life of a self-conjured conjured self. Why? Because it cannot simply accept that it is already being. It needs to know about that. It needs to know about the being. It needs to know that it's doing something about it as well. Doing and knowing have never been necessary to simply be. Simply because it is obvious how empty fullness is already whole, perfect, complete, just as it manifests as absolutely everything. That doesn't need to be figured out, doesn't need to be known, doesn't need to be explained, does not require that, does not require an explanation, which is how and why there is no reason, meaning, and purpose behind it. And so therefore, why bother expressing and communicating and talking about it, since there's nobody else to communicate with? And yet, communication continues to apparently appear to happen, doesn't it? Obviously. Otherwise, this particular apparent appearance of a human corporeal manifestation of an action figure, of a body-mind, would not be expressing in this way. This particular body-mind is expressing in this way simply because it can. Not because it has a meaning, reason, and purpose to do that. It is simply expressing. Just as a bird in nature, it chirps. It's not self-aware of its own chirping, is it? And yet, it's chirping anyway. It doesn't know why it's chirping. It's just simply an expression of that particular frequency of resonance, of an energetic movement, of that particular type of life form. And it is labeled, and it is named. What is it named? In the English language, it's named a bird. And just as an example, as a contrast, there's another language referred to as Spanish. And the enunciation of a labeling or a name for bird in English, in Spanish, is pájaro. So that is one crude example of how one resonance or frequency or resonance of a manifestation of a human corporeal unit of local quality conscious energy form is going to broadcast or express. When we use this word broadcast, I'm referring to the same as an expression. Broadcasting, expression, same thing, but it means, it is the meaning behind that particular word when about an expression is a communication. It's the same thing. It is expressing, it is communicating. But what is it communicating? It's not communicating to anything else. It is simply a natural expression of a particular frequency of resonance of a life form. A life form that does not need to be figured out, and yet it is labeled and named something. It is given a label, it is given a name. It doesn't need to have one, though. See, that's the bottom line. What is the bottom line to all this, then? Does absolutely every living thing that is referred to as a living thing, does that require labeling and naming? No. And yet, when we look back to the origins of Christianity as an example, let us name, let us do this, let us do that. Now, Why do you suppose? And how did that come about? Somehow, there were groups of conjured cells that decided to take the story of Earth, and then that which was expressing as a human corporeal manifestation, somehow in agreement made these decisions to say, everything that is seen is a creation, everything that is seen since it was created by a creator, and the creator was pleased with his creation and gave permission for the creator's creation, which would be the human race. And in Christian circles, it was the Adamic tribe of Adam. And there's really interesting information regarding that story, because a story can be told in one of innumerable ways. And here comes that all over again, the idea of a multitudinal, infinitudinal complexification of manifestations that cannot be counted. This is why there can be volumes and volumes and volumes of literature and information that scribed that would take years and years and years to put together, which apparently is already put together in books such as, and literature such as the Upanishads and the various branches of the Upanishads, and also the Bhagavad Gita. Bhagavad Gita as it is, I mean the direct translation from the Sanskrit to English and then expressed that way. The multitudinous of innumerable manifestations that are beyond countenance. It cannot be measured. Life and empty fullness are immeasurable, simply because non-separation is immeasurable. That which is claimed to be measured, once it is measured, and then along comes an immeasurable measurement, which is the same that apparently appears to happen with the experiment of the double slit experiment. It is witnessed that once there's an observer, then the particle collapses to a wave. If there is no observer, the particle continues on as a particle. Somehow, the observer, but not as a separate observer, but the active observance apparently appears to be what causes a distortion pattern. Because the active observance is beingness. And that is a radiation, that's an emanation of energy of a particular frequency, getting back to frequency of resonance, or the law of resonance. And resonance is the manifestation of the universe. The infinite universe is manifesting. The Hubble telescope is just peering at a small section of the infinite universe. And as the lens, or the lenses of the Hubble telescope, looking through that narrow lens, cannot capture the entirety of the infinite universe, because it's impossible. That can never be achieved. That can never be done. That can never be done or known. That is unknowable. And it doesn't require doing it. To take a Hubble telescope out into space and then report back points of light that are seen, and then call each point of light a different energetic movement or frequency or resonance that is associated with astronomy. Of course, astronomers can identify what they refer to as identification of a star, of a sun, quasar. They labeled it. There it is again. Labeling and conjuring these ideas of what? Of knowledge. Of a knowledge base. Simply because there are self-conscious selves that just cannot simply rest in the beingness. Just let it be. No, not good enough. Not good enough for the self-conscious self that is compelled to know, to figure it out. It believes that it has to figure all of this out. And so this is how academia came about. Academia came about based on what? Based on the desire and the need to know. To know about what? To know about its very nature and its being, its beingness. It does not require a knowledge base. It doesn't, to simply exist, does not require knowing of that. No, it does not. And yet it is said, oh, but you need to know about yourself. You need to understand how you are. How else are you going to figure out, how you're going to be the next day, or how you need to be a certain way. No. No, see, a knowledge of beingness is not necessary to just simply be in a natural state. Simply because it finds on its own. It's in, so to speak, a default position. It's always in that default position. It returns to a default position automatically, just as the heart beats automatically, and the automated responses that are voluntary. I mean, they're just automatically voluntary. It doesn't require thinking about it. Do you have to think yourself to breathe? The self doesn't have to think to breathe. It's already in that default position, manifesting this idea, well, this body-mind needs to breathe. Well, it's breathing on its own. You don't have to think about it. Then yoga became introduced to control it. Then the idea of control. And see, that's how separation began. Separation began via groups of self-conscious selves that got together to do what? Well, we need to know about certain things that we believe are going on, that are happening. And then the idea of a happening, the idea of an event, separation. So many different descriptions of separation. And yet, a conjured self will try to defend that and say, oh, but this is necessary. This must be a requirement. We need to do something about certain things. We need to react. We need to know about it as well. We need to know about these doings that we're doing. We have to do something about it. We have to know. No, you don't. To simply be doesn't require that. See, this is what and how it happened. In fact, is it not so obvious that just the simplicity of living and the innocence, recapture, it is recapture, and it is simply innocently being. And it's not thinking about being, just as a child is at play. It's the activity, it's the action of play, and that's how it's expressing. And it is happy being. It is so happy being that it doesn't take the time to figure out, wow, how am I being today? Maybe I should ask my parents. Am I being right or wrong, or should I be a certain way? No, it doesn't question its beingness, does it? Of course not. It's not necessary. It never was. So here's the idea. There's the idea of schooling, academia, and then the societal structure. That's how it all started. That's how it all began. Simply because the idea was entertained by groups of subconscious selves that thought, you know what? we need to start controlling what we're doing. We need to know about that too. And we need to create these disciplines, these schools of thought. And we need to take these schools of thought because it apparently appears to be a process. It must be a process. Now, it seems that we're all individuals. We're physical. We're exclusively real, exclusively physical and solid. And anybody saying otherwise needs to go to school. They need to go to our school. So there's that idea of academia. Well, we need to know about our beingness. We need to know how to be a certain way. See? We need to know how to be a certain way. And then what follows along with knowing how to be a certain way? Acting a certain way. Behaving a certain way. Behavior, saying, oh, well, this is the proper way to be. And you need to know about that. And then you need to take action. You need to do something about it. See, the knowing and the doing. Then the idea of a belief that knowing and doing is required to be sprung up. And then the self-conjured conjured self. Right there. That's how it developed. Absolutely everything. Since absolutely everything is appearing and manifesting in space and time, and although that is not of space and time, it is both. It's the paradox. Beingness, manifestation, non-beingness from nowhere, out of nothing, from the void. Both at the same time. It apparently appears to be as though it's a cycle that's going on. And then here's where the idea of cycling and clockwork and timing, all of these sciences and various explanations, this is how it turned out to be the way it has turned out to be. Now, referring to be, that turned out to be, no, it turned out to manifest. Is being the same as manifesting? Yes, of course it is. For there to be manifestation, there is energy behind the manifestation. And where is that energy coming from? Out of nowhere, from nothing. Does anybody know that? No. It's not something that's known simply because you're already naturally being. That's the default position, to be. Do we need to know about that? Do we need to create a religion about it? Well, it's already happened, hasn't it? The religions are already out there. They've already been conjured. They've been conjured by groups of subconjured conjured selves that believed they needed to know and needed to do something about the knowing, and then create schools and institutions, and then have gurus and then teachers. And see, that's how it all started in India as well, just as it started in modern society in the Western world, of course, in the United States and in Canada. Even here in the United Kingdom, you have the academic system that's been going on for hundreds of years now. Is it right or wrong? No, it just apparently appears to be what happened. And why did it happen that way? No meaning, reason, or purpose. It's just a description of what apparently appears to have happened. And so, does it have to be referred to? Do we have to speak of it? No, it can be spoken of. And therefore, it is being spoken of. It is conversations, communication. Communication between two separate, no. We are and we are not, mingling with absolutely everything. And that is the level of beingness that is referred to. That's the non-separation. The natural mingling with absolutely everything that appears as it does. And that's it right there. We don't need to know anything about it. We don't have to do anything about it when we're simply being. So, non-duality, Advaita Vedanta, the Gita, happens to be the science of self-realization. It's self-inquiry. It is recognizing that beingness is simply being and mingling with absolutely everything that appears of its own accord. All the appearances, we're all mingling. We are and we are not. It is and it isn't. Local quality conscious energy form, non-local quality conscious energy fields. Energy fields where? From nothing, out of nowhere. Are they separate energetic fields? They can appear as though they're separate, but they're not. They are mingling together, coalescing so well. But how is that possible? No. A separate self or a unit of local quiet conscious energy form cannot know that because it's simply unknowable. And therefore, what does it do? Simply mingles with that which is knowable and unknowable, both real and unreal. Manifesting in space and time from nowhere. The source, nothing, the void, out of nowhere. How is that so? Nobody knows. It doesn't need to be known. This is how and why there's no reason, meaning, and purpose behind all of it. So let it be then. It's that simple. Just let it be.
Seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching. Well, the mental state by certain activities implies and insinuates a self. So you get a feeling of when there's an action that you're the doer, yes? Or when there's consciousness in contact, seeing, hearing, feeling, tasting, touching, somehow you're the seer, the hearer, the feeler, the tasting. Like there's an ownership. That doesn't come naturally, it's implied, yeah. Yeah, so to me, I went into recovery, and I got struck sober. It was definitely that statement that you'll suddenly realize that a power greater than you can do for you what you can't do for myself. I had that for sure. And its effects have lasted over 30 years now, 31 years just last week. So.
See, since we're referring to non-dualism research, okay, of course that was obviously conjured. Prior to this, these presentations, these video presentations, prior to that, there was no labeling of such as presentation and labeled as that, as non-dualism research. So that wasn't, no, that wasn't mentioned, or that had not been illustrated or shown. That wasn't apparently appearing to go on into YouTube. It's just something that was conjured. Now, is there a meaning, reason, and purpose behind it? No, it's just simply an expression. Expression of what? Just as was mentioned earlier about a bird, about a pájaro. It chirps. It doesn't know why or how it's chirping. It's not recognizing it's chirping in a particular way. It doesn't know what time of morning or day. It just knows what? It doesn't know anything about itself, does it? Because it's simply a living creature, is it not? I mean, this is recognized that is a living thing. And yet, it is given a name and labeled a word, a term that sounds familiar because it was learned. How? Through academia. Did it have to be that way? No, it's just the way it's somehow turned out. You have a group of conjured cells that thought, well, we need to create some kind of a school system so that we can learn and know. Do we need to learn and know about how to be? No. Why did it turn out that way? It could have easily turned out that way, couldn't it? Perhaps at some point it did. Perhaps at some point, absolutely everybody that was manifesting as a human corporeal manifestation, okay, not singled out, but the group consensus, the group idea, the collective idea, the collective consciousness idea, that kind of idea, that everything is collective. No, it's just all mingling. There's no separation. It's all about non-separation. Absolutely everything. That's non-separation. But how and why that is, just so many self-conjured cells cannot just let it rest and be the way that it is. So, what happens? Then these presentations, then satsangs are held, and then non-duality speakers arise. And they apparently appear to be popping up out of nowhere. Because they are. In a sense, it's true. Literally. Literally, non-duality speakers have been popping up out of nowhere, it seems. Seemingly so. And they're expressing in a very similar fashion, same way as the story of Earth could be told. Now there are varied variables, variations of innumerable types of not only versions of the story of Earth, but also versions of the story of what? Manifestations of local units of quality of consciousness, humanly corporeal energy forms that are expressing in various languages. Look at the multitude countenance though. 8 billion, that's quite high. But notice and recognize that it's not a consistent, exact, precise number at any given time. Where there's the appearance of births and deaths constantly going on within the energetic movement of all of these human corporeal manifestations apparently appear to be appearing. They are and they are not. And it apparently appears to be new ones, more human corporeal manifestations appearing. Now, all that is just a blend. It's just a mixture. It's a mixture of energetic movements that are going on. Why? Because the countenance is already set. The setup is already everywhere. The everywhereness of everywhere. Empty fullness. Spacious aliveness. Simply this. That's the setup. It's already set up. It's whole, complete, and perfect just as it is. It's set up. Set up for what? Not for any single energetic movement. It is set up for absolutely all of it. And nobody knows the countenance of all of that. All of the dualities that comprise this, that, and the other, this and that. The countenance is so great, it apparently appears to appear as though there's an infinitudinal complexification that is appearing. And nobody knows the countenance. There is no exact number. There's no exacting in that. The precision in itself of its completeness and wholeness is beyond measure. This is why it is so ridiculous to witness and observe and hear and about these astrophysicists that are claiming they're experts of consciousness, and they have mathematical equations that they can tell you that the universe is finite. Hell no. Of course not. How absurd. How absurd to claim that you're an expert of consciousness and you're going to come up with your theory and you say, you know what, here's my big theory of everything, okay? Yeah, I'm going to make Stephen Hawking look like a fool. That's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to come up with my theory, big theory of everything, and I'm going to call the universe finite. Ridiculous. The stupidity. It is. It's ignorance. The self-conjured conjured self is so ignorant and it's so it's so full of itself that it actually believes that the universe is finite. And it says, oh, look, I can come up with a mathematical equation. Where's my Nobel Prize? Where's my trophy? Where's my recognition? I want to be recognized. Okay, so here's my name. I have my birth certificate. Yeah, that's me. Yeah. I'm a very important person. I'm coming up with an idea that nobody else has come up. Yeah, I call it a theory, but you know what? You have a theory as well. You have your big theory of everything. And you have a tool set, so use that tool set so that you can do what? So you can travel out of body, and then you can go to your own historical database, because reincarnation is true. You've had past lives, and it just goes on and on and on like that. The Conjuring is just incredibly absurd that some conjured self would go to such lengths to know and to claim that it knows. It claims that it knows something very unique and special, unlike anybody else. is in possession of. That the self-conjured conjured self is in possession of information and knowledge that absolutely nobody else on the freaking planet has. Why? Because it's that important to itself. The self-centeredness, it knows no measure, does it? These claims. Oh, I know what's going on. I know that this universe is finite. I can come up with a mathematical equation because I have the credentials. I have the master's degree in physics. I worked for NASA before, and so, my name is Dr. Such and Such. Okay, I'll tell you about my story. Here's my autobiography. Oh, by the way, you want to know about my autobiography? Just buy my book. Just purchase my book, and then you'll know. Then you'll be in the know as well. Wouldn't that be great? See? No, there's nothing to sell. It never was. Leave it alone. Let it be. It's okay. We can talk about it, but we can't. We don't have to make a claim about it. We can't do it. You're going to try it. You're going to go ahead and make an effort, and you're going to do it anyway. But guess what? And that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. It never did matter. It never will matter. It only matters to what? It only matters to that conjured self that believes so much in itself that it cannot entertain any other idea other than its own. That believes it has its own thoughts and ideas that are original. It believes it has original thoughts and ideas of its own that nobody else has. See, having knowledge. Oh, I have it. I know I have it because I have the credentials. I have the degrees. Degrees, a master's degree, a doctor's degree, and then see, I have the credentials, so you have to listen to me because I can validate that. I can validate anything that I'm talking about because I'm an expert in my field. And I happen to be an expert in consciousness. I know what I'm talking about. No. Nobody knows. It is an infinite universe. It is not finite. It has never been infinite. It's never been finite. That's what I meant. It is and it isn't, though. It has always been infinite. So how can anybody claim to say that this is a finite universe that can be measured, it can be counted in a mathematical equation? It might take years to come up with it, but we are going to come up with it anyway. Oh, but it's just a theory. We don't know really for sure all the way through because there's probability distributions. It could go this way, it could go that way. Oh, man. No. Nobody knows that, but you know what? The claims go on. The claims go on. Nobody's going to stop it, but you know what? All of it. No meaning, reason, purpose behind it. So if there's going to be a group of conjured selves gathering along with that particular conjured self that says, look, let's have podcasts. Let's get together, and it's a similar gathering as what's going on with this Neo-Advaitans movement. With non-duality, you see the same thing happening there, where groups of non-duality speakers are speaking in a similar way, but they believe that they're helping in some way. They believe that they're going about carrying on these satsangs and then writing books about non-duality and coming up with titles and all of these things that are apparently appearing to go on. It's not necessary, because even they will say admittedly that, oh, it's just apparently appearing to happen. Yeah. Oh, we don't know why or how. It's just apparently appearing to happen. Well, you know what? It's apparent and non-apparent. It's both. So that could be stated, couldn't it? Sure. Because we are and we are not. It is and it isn't. So if that's the case, if empty fullness it is and it isn't, and we are and we are not, then it is apparent and non-apparent. But we only hear the apparent part. Why do we only hear the apparent bit? We only hear, oh, well, it apparently appears to be so. But you don't hear, well, follow up on it, because that's not just it. It's not just exclusively apparent. No, it is both. It is apparent and non-apparent. It is both. If you see, this is what's happening, apparently and not apparently so, with the satsangs that are being organized, that are going on, apparently appearing in different parts of the earth. The story of Earth, another version. There it is, and it goes on in so many variables, so many different ways, so many different directions. And yet, these energetic movements are going on of its own accord and volition, because there's that kind of freedom. There's that degree of freedom. The degree of freedom knows no bound, has no boundaries, no parameters. It is that radically free. So, if empty fullness and simply this, all that is and all that is not empty fullness, both real and unreal, observable and observable, knowable and unknowable, for nobody and for no meaning, reason, purpose other than its own accord of volition, if it's that radically free, absolutely everything else is just as radically free. Absolutely everything that's mingling and apparently appearing as time and the apparent appearance of everything as an overlay. And then there's consciousness to cognize about it, and then there is language to speak about it and express, and these local units of quality consciousness energy forms that are appearing for an indeterminate duration, for an impermanently indeterminate duration in space and time, and yet not of space and time, ad infinitum. Constantly. The infinitudinal complexification is going to go on like this. Mingling energetic movements, mingling all types of different energetic movements that are mingling. This is going to continuously go on ad infinitum this way. The story of Earth. The story of Earth is going to be told and retold over and over again, different versions. Why? Simply because there are more stories entering into the foray of absolutely everything that is appearing as it does, what is and what is not. We are manifestations, human corporeal appearances, visibly observable mirrors for an indeterminate duration in space and time, but not of space and time. It's both. That's it. Get used to it, or don't get used to it. Doesn't matter, one way or the other. It never did. There's no meaning, reason, purpose. All of this doesn't matter. Why? Because it's of its own accord and volition. But that doesn't have to have a purpose, meaning, or reason for absolutely everything to appear as it does. It's of its own accord and volition. It's not of Dr. Thomas Campbell's accord and volition, is it? No. Well, you're saying he's an expert of consciousness, and he's saying it's a finite universe, and that we can have out-of-body experiences if we just follow a certain process and a certain way of going about things, and realizing, recognizing that there are probability distributions in the universe, and that this is why the double-slit experiment goes this way, that way. All of this does not require an explanation like that. Nobody needs to know that, and nobody does. We simply are, and we simply are not. We are, and we are not. Leave it there. Just be. Leave it alone. And then guess what could arise out of all that? By letting everything be just as it does. Then, in the presence, I'm referring to both personal and impersonal presence. Because we are and we are not. It's personal and impersonal. But it's not exclusively real, it's not exclusively physical, it's not exclusively known, not exclusively observable, it's not exclusively knowable. It's both. And it's apparently and non-apparently so. It is both. Leave it there. Rest in that. It's good enough. Okay. There are these temporally, when we say temporal, we're referring to time. Since time is timing, the apparent appearance of absolutely everything is apparently appearing as anything that can appear within absolutely everything. And then within the appearance of anything, there are things that have already been labeled by with the use of various languages, but that's not it. No, Leave it where? Leave it with absolutely everything. Because to break that down and begin saying, well, absolutely anything can appear and absolutely everything is already appearing. No, that's the same as saying, well, there's probability distribution, so what could appear might appear in a certain way, and there's a frequency of resonance going to appear. All of that doesn't matter. You don't have to measure it. You don't have to know it. You don't have to do anything about it. Just simply be. Yes. You're being anyway. Regardless if you like it or not, it doesn't matter. Like it or not, you're being anyway. Ad infinitum. You're mingling with absolutely everything. Simply this. You're mingling with it. You don't have to call it unconditional love. You don't have to call it empty fullness. You don't have to call it anything. Just simply be and rest in that and let it be. Right there. That's the peace that surpasses all understanding. Yes. You see how? You notice how? It surpasses all understanding? Because understanding was never required to begin with. That's how it easily surpasses it. Because you're simply being, naturally being, existing, living your life. And if it's going to be discussed in a saying, fine, it is. So what? Does it matter? No, of course not. I never did. So you're either going to charge a whole lot of money, to apparent people that are going out and trying to earn a living so that they can have a comfortable way of appearing? Well, it's just apparent. It appears to be so. But why does it have to be this way or that way? Why? People say, well, why does there have to be hunger? Why does there have to be starvation in the story of Earth? Why does there have to be so much suffering? Well, it's both. Apparently, a human corporeal manifestation can appear in one of innumerable ways. Is it appearing for a particular reason in a certain way? Is it suffering in a certain way? No, none of that. All of that is claimed as suffering, as though there's a separate person suffering somewhere. Oh, yes, definitely. It is very real to them. Yes, it's very real to the sufferer of suffering. There's hunger and starvation. Those are very real sufferings. Does it have to be going on? No, of course not. Can there be intervention? Of course there can. Yes, there could be interventions there. You could try to help and assist. Does it matter? Well, in a sense, it does. In a sense, it really does. If you're comfortably sitting, just as this human corporeal manifestation right now, sitting in this chair comfortably, it has a job that it maintains. It pays its taxes because it knows if it doesn't pay its taxes, it's going to get kicked out. It will no longer be able to live in that dwelling. And that is a societal structure, and that works. Sure, it works. Yeah, that's living on the grid, so to speak. Yeah. Well, if you're compelled, if you have the means to do that and go help people that are starving and hungry, do that. If you're compelled to do it, yes, do that. But don't do that to look a certain way to others, because that's not how it really is. If you're going to help somebody, it's obviously living homeless, you see homeless people or you see somebody suffering in some way, and you feel compelled to go help too, yeah, do that. If you can. If it's within your means to do that, if it's within your means. This is why and how it could work. We could see a greater harmony throughout the story of Earth, throughout the planet, throughout the world, where there's concentrations of suffering and hungry people that don't have enough to eat, or they don't have the means by which to tap into this obvious grid, being on the grid, and as the societal structure's grid, and yes, it works, and there's a lot of good in it. There's more good than bad. I mean, if you want to look at percentages and things like that nature. This is why there are appearances of human corporeal manifestations, people that are trying to migrate. That's why they're trying to come over to the United Kingdom. That's why they've been doing so, and that's why they're so against Brexit, because then there's no longer going to be the benefits that they're going to use. But then again, you need to contribute as well. So there's going to be some kind of agreement going on, some kind of exchange. This is why it's worked. We're referring to Brexit as such a strong topic right now, politically speaking, here in the United Kingdom. It was supposed to happen on the 29th, and what day is it? It's the 31st. That's a major topic here in the United Kingdom right now about the Brexit. And there was supposed to be some kind of deal and negotiation with the European Union as this is extending now. There's an extension. And then they wonder why the British nationals are angry and upset about it. Well, you said Brexit. You said the 29th. Now you're extending it? No. You said the 29th. The 29th, that's it. It should have happened this past Friday, shouldn't it? Yes. This past Friday, the 29th of March. That was the Brexit date. It was agreed upon, was it not? Oh, no, it was agreed. Now we got to extend it now. Oh, we need to try to come up with some kind of article. No, let's go ahead and contract. Oh, man. Delaying. Why delaying? See? There it is again. So conjured selves agreements in various ways of going about living and being. Oh. All this bickering necessary? Of course not. Is there enough food to go around so that absolutely every human being that will ever be born will have enough to eat, will have access to food and water and things of that nature? You know, that's a very controversial subject in itself, isn't it? It's not so much the having, it is accessing. And there's certain parts of the earth that are not very habitable. The habitation, to set up a habitation on some areas of the earth, it just can't be. It can't be set up that way because there's certain types of environments that are not very conducive for habitation to happen. Especially in Africa, where it's so dry and it doesn't rain enough, and there's not enough vegetation can grow. Is that anybody's fault? No, obviously not. No, it's just energies that are moving about. Yeah, well, that's the way it obviously apparently appears to be, isn't it? You have different environments around the planet. You know, some areas are a little bit cooler or warmer, but then you have areas that are extreme. So those extreme areas, obviously, if you look on a map, doesn't take a genius to figure that out. Where are the relatively stable environments? Well, the Pacific, you have Hawaii, but then they're susceptible to get bombarded by hurricanes, typhoons over there, over the Pacific. Over the Atlantic Ocean, it's hurricanes, isn't it? And you have the West Indies, and then you have Cuba, and you have the East Coast of the United States that always gets slammed every year by certain massive, storms that are referred to as hurricanes. So to stick to the subject of non-duality, without going off into politics or weather or meteorology, weather forecasts or anything like that, and or even about historical accounts, history, versions of the story of Earth, or going into other tangents. Of course, it's all interrelated in various degrees. It's all interrelated, really. But this approach regarding this so-called law of resonance, there seems to be relational characters there. In other words, the resonance appears and non-apparently, apparently and non-apparently appears to be expressing the way in which two or more apparently different things or phenomena selectively communicate are linked. And yes, all of its resonance. It is. With the human corporeal units of local quiet consciousness energy forms, they're resonating. But they're resonating collectively. That's how they're all collective and interconnected, enmeshed and mingled with absolutely everything that's appearing. Manifestations of resonance. And within those manifestations of resonance, there's frequencies of energetic movements that are going on. Again, it is likened to the analogy of taking the idea of a wavelength frequency modulation, an FM band, and then broadcasting a radio station onto it. And that frequency could be 99.5, 101.2, 103.4, so on and so forth. So taking that analogy and the appearance of units of local quiet conscious energy forms as radio stations are broadcasting on a particular frequency. We used this analogy on the previous volume 7, this is volume 8, as a way to recognize how it apparently appears to be. This setup that apparently appears to be a setup of some type, as absolutely everything is appearing, as it does, of its own accord and volition. Therefore, we are going to talk about that. We're going to refer to it. We're going to point to it. That apparently appears to be that way. That absolutely everything that is making an apparent appearance. There's energetic movements within it that are going on. It apparently and not apparently appears to be so. It is. It's apparent and non-apparent both. Which is how it relates and correlates to, and it's the same as saying we are and we are not. It is and it isn't. It's apparently so and not apparently so. Apparently appears to be and not apparently appears to be. It's both. It apparently appears to be and not apparently appears to be the links which unite all things in the universe, physical objects, mental processes, psychic phenomena, spiritual levels. In other words, everything manifested. Apparently appears to have a basis in the process of resonance. Now that all sounds like fanciful scientific jargon, and that's all that is. That's trying to come up with, conjure an idea to figure out how all of this is appearing as it does. Does it matter? No. Does it meaning, reason, purpose behind it? No. So why come up with all of these ideas and all of these different keys, hidden keys, secrets, hidden knowledge, knowledge that shouldn't be shared by absolutely everyone because they're not responsible enough to hold that knowledge. You know, it just goes on and on that way, hasn't it? And then there's the Illuminati, and then there's these forces that are interfering with the societal structure in some way, and they want dominance. And then there's these extraterrestrials, and there's reptilians, and then it goes on and on. What David Icke's talking about, yes, the reptilians are trying to take over the world, but they've infiltrated the parliament, and the queen is part of it all. And oh man, all of this conjuring is just unnecessary. Just drop all the crap, man. Just drop all the bullshit. Drop all of that. There's no knowing that's necessary. You don't have to do anything about it. You don't have to write another freaking book. All these books and literature, burn them all. You don't need them. Just be. Oh, well, we need to figure out how we're going to work this out. We need to work it out because, well, the Earth's not that stable. And we need to prepare for what's coming, and we don't want to be unprepared when the Armageddon situation happens. And the Christians are talking about the second coming, that Christ's supposed to come back, and that the devil's already on the earth. And it goes on and on like that. It's crazy. That right there, all these beliefs and all these religions and all these ideas, that apparently appears to be crazier than the ones that are called crazy, that are into weird shit. When I say weird, weird stuff, weird ideas and outlandish, entertainments of ideas, such as otherworldly extraterrestrials, that there's this galactic federation that's going on, very similar to Star Wars or Star Trek science fiction kind of ideas. That seems to be popular, with the idea of artificial intelligence. And there's Sophie, and then there's Alexa. You talk to it, and it's a database, just like Google, and now you can interact with speech with it, and that's the next stage, right before having your own Android. Having your own. First it's really going to cost, and there's the idea of keeping up with the Joneses. Well, do you have an Alexa? Well, most people are starting to own one now, and they're starting to manufacture them. And supply and demand thing. Well, if demand's great enough, then we're going to have to increase the supply. But then the cost is going to be great if we don't have that much on supply. And so there's that too. Conjuring more things to do, more activities to become involved with. Why? Because it's already boring what we were doing before. Oh yeah, we used to use citizen band radios, but that got boring. Oh, when you got the internet, oh, that's great. Well, that's starting to get boring too. Go on Facebook, this, that, and the other. Oh, okay, there's this WeMe now. Oh, there's another social network that sprung up. It's called WeMe, and so let's get involved with that because that looks interesting. Well, let's go ahead and do that. Get involved with that. Well, just of course, it has been said, is doing necessary? No. To be? No, of course not. Do we need to know anything about that, about being? Well, in a sense, yeah. There's self-inquiry, self-realization, but that's part of the beingness. So, see, it just the conjuring just doesn't end. It doesn't. It's both hand in hand. Is it right or wrong? No, it's not saying that either. It's both. Does it have to be exclusively right or exclusively wrong? No, we're not referring to the duality. That's that separate sense of self. That's referring to separation. And non-duality by Vedanta is not about that.
I just don't leave that bottled up in recovery. My mind entertains, what does that really imply that something can do for us what we can't do for ourselves?
See, that's what becomes confusing to some people that are going to a site saying, my mind entertains this. See, but then we were referring to before, wait a minute, you said your mind? My mind? No, we don't have minds of our own. Yeah, we tap into them, sure, but in a sense that's what we're referring to. But if you're going to say, well, my money, my health, I want you to have plenty of money, but I don't want you to have any of my money, and then I want you to have health, but I have my health, my state of health is a certain way and it's going to change. My sex, I have sexual escapades, if I'm single and, going about doing that way, and it brings me satisfaction to a certain degree, happiness, and, my this, my that, all that doesn't matter, never did because it's not about that. It's not about my life. It's not about your life. There's just simply life. Live it then. Be. There it is. End of story. Shut case. Go on. Just go on with being, because there is just being. Yes, because it's simply this, right? We are and we are not. It is and it isn't. It's apparently and not apparently. It's apparently so and not apparently so. It's apparently and not apparently so. Yeah, we'll just go on with that then. Yet we're going to hold our satsangs. We're going to we're going to continue going around and just simply expressing it because again, that which is appearing as absolutely everything is in charge somehow. Apparently appears to be that way. There's some type of force that apparently appears to permit manifestation to appear as it does. So if we are and we are not, if we're mingling with that which is and isn't, if we're human corporeal manifestations and we're expressing and we understand various languages and we communicate, that there's the apparent appearance of communication going on, and a satsang can be held on absolutely any place where it's habitable, of course. Of course, the most populous cities where it apparently appears to be human corporeal manifestations, apparently appears to be people. So where are we going to hold a satsang? Well, where the most populous places are, right? We're going to go to the largest cities, and some cities where there's a lot of people around. That's where we're going to hold a satsang. Why are we going to hold it there? Well, because the apparent appearance of where they appear to be is certain cities, certain places on the planet. So let's go ahead and hold a satsang there. Maybe they haven't heard the message yet. Maybe they don't access the internet. There's so many different YouTube channels, and they're continuously new ones, growing more and more and more. It apparently appears to be very similar to the way a newborn shows up. Another new baby something. There's animals in the wild. There's also continuing, perpetuating their species. Birds just continue to have babies. Absolutely every other living thing that has been identified and labeled, categorized with certain names, those are having babies. Well, I mean having, but nobody has the baby, but life has all of this manifestation that's being introduced. So in a sense, to be born is just simply manifestation appearing. So if there's a baby going to be born, a baby something, and it's going to be a living form, even with the microbial, at the microbial level, and the insects too, they have babies, some in various different ways, manifests, appears to be another one. And it just keeps going. And on, ad infinitum. It's always been that way. Always will be that way. But its energetic movements are continuously changing in innumerable ways. The infinitudinal complexification cannot be counted. The countenance is too great. And it's not finite. None of it's finite. No. No, it's not a finite universe. It's an infinite universe of infinitudinal complexification. The countenance is just as great as every single grain of sand that comprises beaches on the planet Earth. And then points of light, space. The Hubble cannot count every single one of them. Every single one of them, just as somebody can't just go to every single beach and begin to collect and count every grain of sand. Count is too great of absolutely everything. That's infinite. But the mind cannot grasp it. Why? Because the mind is temporary finite. It is finite. It is finite. How? How and why is it finite? Well, it appears, but it's not exclusively finite. See, that's the paradox again. It is both finite and infinite. It is finite and infinite, both at the same time. That's how it's apparent and non-apparent. We are and we are not. It is and it isn't. It's both. All of it. Absolutely everything.
That something must be where we're at all times, and I would say it's us actually, but not something that's obvious to us, but it is us, but it isn't obvious to us. So there's an us that it isn't obvious to. I say we're not that us, and then when you see you're not that us, then that us that we are becomes obvious. and they can have effects. And its effects are different than, you ever hear of the Course in Miracles? Very trippy book. Yeah, so there's like a download in the 70s. And they go into this thing I really liked. It would be called causeless effects. So there are a lot of effects that aren't caused. So they're appearing. Yes, they're contrived, they're imagined. Yes, they're seemingly, they appear to be true, but they're not true. They're causeless effects.
See, they appear to be true, and they're not true. See, there's that apparentness and non-apparentness. So I was referring to, you can't just have exclusively apparentness, you have to have both, because it is both. You don't have to have it, nobody has it. It's just simply the way absolutely everything is appearing. It is apparent and it's not apparent, both. You can't just say, oh, well, it apparently appears to be so, and just leave it there and then be silent. The rest of the set saying no. Express that. It is included. It is. It apparently appears to be so, and it apparently appears to be not so. It's both apparent and non-apparent. It is both. And it's how we are and we are not. It is and it isn't. It is simply this. It is empty fullness. It's both. It is and it isn't. But nobody knows how it is and it isn't. And nobody needs to know that. There's no meaning, reason, or purpose for it to be isness-ing, and non-isness-ing. It is both. Simultaneously both.
There's nothing causing it. Yeah, therefore, it's not really an effect. Yeah, it's just, yeah. So, I would say this, the selfing is sort of like that. There's effects, yes, of living. There's contact, and that effect of contact, the mental state uses it to imply a cause. So, like if you listen to your own language in your head, the language is basically implying you have a lot to do with a lot of shit you have nothing to do with. Yeah, it's like throwing out possessiveness and I did it or like that. And even a simple example of, like 65 years ago, I was in Ocean Beach surfing, January 30th, I think, or the 23rd, something like that, right around my birthday, and the knee went out in the water. Yeah, but then after I got out and everything, and then when I would tell people about it, I would say I hurt my knee. So it sounded like I went out there to hurt my knee, like I took a hammer in my wetsuit, bam, bam, bam. But no, there was a response to something, which is the knee went out, and then something became aware of that, and then there was a narration of that awareness to imply it was me, and somehow I had something to do with it. Like, if I didn't fucking do this, then I did, it's just, and it goes on and on and on and on and on. So if you're in recovery, it's going to lead you to seeing that, all right, this happened when I was 9 years sober, and that's just made up, it was always happening. Once I was doing those workshops and at the dry dock, and it all came out of how it works. And so I used to read that quite a lot, and I was looking at it another time, and there's on page 64, right when they're going into the recovery phase, the inventory phase, it says, hey, being convinced, which they use that statement a lot in this first few steps. So it's like a requirement in a way. There's the requirement for you to have an understanding that's going to allow new possibility, like being sober. You've got to be convinced of something. And this one thing is being convinced that self, manifested in various ways, has defeated us. So Bill W., knowingly or not knowingly, separated the two. There's self and us. Yeah, self, us. Yeah. So it's not us that has defeated us through manifestations of us. It's self has defeated us through manifestations of self. Yeah? So why are most people reporting about the manifestations and calling them theirs? Yes, I just don't see how we're going to have lasting relief if we keep pledging allegiance to the problem. I don't know. So, you know, if you keep, it's sort of like if Stanley was here and he was manifesting through Paul, and Paul, every time it became aware or conscious of a manifestation, would call it mine, I would be in the act of being identified as Stanley. Yeah? So that to me, I think, is the root of the problem. The root of the problem, which is a great diagnosis because it's imaginary. You're not a self. You're not a long-lasting, independent, separate entity. You're not a thing, in a sense. You appear as a thing, but what you're appearing to is not a thing. Yeah? What's seeing you is not a thing. These eyes aren't seeing anything. They facilitate what we call seeing, but it's consciousness, yes? And consciousness is not a thing. There's not like, oh, this Chuck consciousness, you know, little 6x4. It's just, it's a field of whatever, you know, who knows, brilliant or alertness or whatever. That's inherently empty. I don't know. You can describe it thousands of ways. You'll never hit it on the nail on the head because it's us. You can't describe what you are. You can only be it, yeah? You can describe what you're not very well. But you can't describe what you are because you aren't. That is the fundamental block. So recovery says it in a way, because a lot of people must have ran into that block, because this isn't written in the big book, but it must have been an observation in the communities of recovered people, which is self can't get out of self. So wait a minute, so that probably means a lot of people, quote unquote, were seemingly trying to get out of self or self, and they observed that it wasn't working. And after beating themselves up and doing tons of things, they finally reached the conclusion, hey, self can't get out of self. I mean, that should put time out for everything, really. Okay, let that sit for a second. Let's not run right over to the next thing to do. But let's see, hey, wait a minute, self can't get out of self. Does that fit what I've been basically doing? Have I been, quote unquote, doing what it's describing, which is I've been trying to get out of self as self? Yes, yes, guilty. I am convicted. I admit to my innermost self, that's what's been happening pretty much since I was 6 years old, I'd say. Yeah? I've been trying to get out of me as me. And there's nothing like when you're struck with knowledge, yeah? When you're struck with knowledge, a whole lot gets downloaded in no time at all, and a lot's revealed. Like most of my behavioral patterns and schemes and looking in time was trying to get out of self as self. Every drug I took, every shot I hit, everything, it was really based, every science fiction book I read, I was trying to get out of where I thought I was in. Basically, it was a strong drive. So when that behavior is finally described to me, I have the ability to be convinced that it's true. Yeah? So what does one do? I don't know, find out. I can maybe give you a policeman's artist composite drawing of what's happening with me, but I just categorize it as a traveling lighter, really. I mean, a lot of stabilized traveling lighter. And it seems like, wow, what's the big deal of that? It's a huge deal when there's the possibility of traveling quite heavy available to us, because like it or not, we're in like a dualistic dreaming, yes? High, low, close, far, connected, disconnected, aversion, desire, all this. It's a huge interplay that keeps the whole little energetic ball rolling around, yes? Yeah, so like electric magnetism. So the magnetism produces electricity, electricity produces magnetism. Yes, so aversion produces desire, desire produces aversion. Yes, and so on. It just goes on and on and on. There's no in out of that. You're not going to get out of it, you know, for being in it. You're just not. You're going to go on, and it says beautifully in recovery, you can't get around this statement. if you see recovery as a linear process, which it is, it's 12 steps. And so the linear process, in any linear process, first would be more important than next, I would say. Yes, you would say first would be, wait a minute, I gotta listen to this, and then next, and not next and then first. Yeah, next and then get to first later. It would be first and then next. Yeah. So, all right, so the next in that statement is the third step of recovery. Turning, one's will life over to the care of a higher power. Yes, and playing the role of it's going to be the father, you're going to be the child, all like this. It gives you some imagery of what it'd be like great masters would call it surrender, and then seeing everything as thy will be done. And after a period of time, observing thy will is done. It's not a future thing, you see it, yeah. So, all right, and it says, all right, so first, what's the first? Because the next is the biggest principle of recovery. Where's the first? It's only like 4 sentences before, and it says, first, you gotta quit playing God. This is the key. Yeah, this is where the little Chinese thumb torture appears. Yes, it does. It's right there. You got to quit playing God. It doesn't give you, the 58 reasons why. It doesn't work, really. Yeah, let's count the ways. No, it just doesn't work. Very small sentence. Yeah, and it moves on to the next thing. All right, so quit playing God. Yeah. All right, so I'm assuming from my own checking things out, the mental narration is playing God. Yeah, it tells you how you were, how you're going to be, how it is. It tells you how the day's going to be. It tells you how the vacation's going to be when you're not even on it yet. It tells you, oh, she's going to hate me for this, whatever. It's constantly pontificating with far-sighted wisdom, which it has none of. Yeah, so that which is playing God is what we're listening to. Pretty.
Well, that which is playing God can also be construed as the subconscious self that believes it has possession of knowledge or information that nobody else has, and so it feels compelled to let other people know about it because it believes it is important to know about a particular subject. And one of the subjects that kind of relate to or surround non-duality is about subjects of consciousness, and referring to time, and time being a threefold principle construct, although it's unreal, although it's an illusion. And then there's consciousness as a stream of energy that is tapped into the mental thought system for something to be cognized. And when I say something to be cognized, the subject to be discussed can be cognized. And how is it cognized? Well, then it's run through a filter. That filter would be the degree of cognition that's acquired, and then there's the knowledge base. And then there are subconscious selves that profess that they have acquired a greater knowledge base than the average self or the average person. And with those credentials, such as a doctorate of divinity, a master's degree, a doctorate in some particular field of study or subject, that they are an expert. They're an expert in the field. Therefore, since they've acquired that level of academia, right? They've gone to university, college, and they have a degree, and those are credentials, and those are credentials that are noticeable to that degree that whomever or the individual that has that amount of a knowledge base, spent so many years studying, then that means that they can profess and validate that they are in possession of that knowledge, to know that they know better and they know more than the other person that never set foot in a college or university, or did not get through the book learning and were not tested. It's not about that. It never was. But yet, it is recognized that way. And it is seen in these groups of, let's say, interviewee scenario. And you'll notice that a majority of those that appear to be interview worthy have already established so much accredited to a certain degree of degrees. They have a certain amount of a credence. They say, well, how much education have you amassed? Have you collected? Have you gathered? What degrees do you hold? Do you have a certain entitlement? Are you a doctor? Do you have a PhD? Do you have some type of acronym at the end of your surname? Well, if you do, then that means you are a certain expert in a certain field, such as a psychologist, or a physicist, or an engineer, or certain fields of study. But to keep that idea of importance and self-importance and credence and that type of thing, to some degree, to some extent, yes. To, let's say, be intellectually adroit to a certain degree, that you can express using the English language to a greater degree than the average person, let's say, that is quite limited in the expression of the language that they may be using. And of course we'll continue to refer to English, of course, because that's the language that as universally spoken, and in most circles of academia, the English language is the predominant language to use. And so I'm referring to those that, let's say, at least have a high school diploma, at least that much schooling or education. Also to include those individuals that use the word, I'll give you an example. What type of word is used in speech most often? Well, that's easy, the word like. And you hear the younger generation, the teenagers, and the teens, the young teens and the teenagers, and even people in their early 20s seem to have adopted it as well. And it's somehow that type of expression using the English language with just a few words and then a repetition of certain phrases and words, such as, instead of, they're saying they're replacing the gaps in their speech with, instead of saying thinking of the next thought to say, or like that, using those two words together. And then they'll make a statement and say, and then they'll make another statement. But the one that is quite, I don't want to say it's an annoyance, but it is a bit obvious that the figures of speech that are used and words that are repeated far too often, and the redundancy is ridiculous, is the word like. Well, the other day I had a sandwich like it tasted like pretty good, but I don't know, I should have chosen a different flavor, like the word like is kind of equivalent to a person that perhaps has difficulty uh, you know, broadening their knowledge base somehow. It could be construed as mental laziness in a sense. It could be construed as a way of noticing the difference between someone that is, let's say, has kind of a limited intellect, and then one that goes all out, and it can hit any age. It doesn't matter how old you are. It matters to the degree of where, if we're referring to expressing using the English language, the English language is so versatile. There's so many terms that can be used. There's many words that can be used to describe or to come up with a description, especially if you're doing a compilation of and putting together some subject matter. If you want to get, if there is a willingness to learn and expand your knowledge base, then the mental thought system will be used in that way.